Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Liturgy, the Work of the People, the Christian Formation series for Fall 2020 at Holy Comforter Episcopal Church. I'm Jimmy Abbott, and in this series, we're taking a step back, especially during this pandemic, to think about why we worship the way that we do. The guiding question throughout this series is, why do Episcopalians do what we do when we gather on Sundays and other special days of the year in the presence of God? Today we're going to be looking at music and art and asking all the why questions. Why do we sing such old songs? Why do we decorate our churches with stained glass windows? Especially in this time in which there are so many different churches who worship in different ways than we do. Why is it that we abide by traditions of hymnody and things that seem old? Now, I have nothing against all the contemporary churches and contemporary music. I really don't. I would say that we in the Episcopal Church have received a tradition, and I think that's a tradition that many of us will continue to abide by. That being said, there are many Episcopal churches that have taken on some of those new forms of worship, of music, of art, and I think that's great. Again, in the Episcopal Church, we see that there can be a broadness, a grandness, a generosity of spirit, if you will. And I think that is also in our music and our art. But today we're going to be talking about what we consider traditional Episcopal hymns and traditional styles of art within Episcopal churches. Let's just read from the hymnal. This is from the flyleaf of the hymnal 1982. It's quoting Canon 24, Section 1 of the Episcopal Church. I do think it's interesting that it says that the minister is the one who oversees music and has responsibility for music, not a director of music or a choir or an organist. I'm going to stop talking for a second and I'll let you all read this to yourselves. So the question, why does the minister, the priest, the rector of a church, say, have authority in matters of music, though there are many of us who have no training in music? I have some training in music, but goodness gracious, learning how to play the tuba is not tremendously helpful when it comes to choral music. I think that the minister has authority in terms of music because it is liturgical and spiritual, and that it is our duty to help the Christians entrusted to us to grow in their faith, to grow closer to God, and we do that through our worship. So I believe that it is the minister's duty, I like duty, to make sure that the music is offered appropriately and spiritually. You'll also see that baked into the canon itself is this sense of teamwork, of mutual trust and cooperation. In fulfilling this responsibility, the minister shall seek assistance from persons skilled in music. In other words, it is not the minister's job alone to do this, but it is simply the minister's job to oversee it. Now, I did take church music classes in seminary, and that's some of the required classes. 2 semesters of church music, and it was tremendously helpful to me, and I learned a lot, which is good. But again, I can't play a piano, I can't play an organ, I can carry a tune, sort of. So again, I'm going to trust musically those who are better trained in music, but I will be the one who has final selection of hymns and whatnot. And I do that, again, to safeguard the church, not safeguard, but to make sure that the music is appropriate, it's appropriate spiritually, and that it helps edify the Christians who will be singing it. Now, why the hymnal 1982? I just got this image from Google. It looks like every pew rack in every Episcopal church I've ever been in. And why do we sing such old songs? You read back through the hymns in the hymnal, and you can see the dates on many of them, and many of them are centuries old. So first of all, I will cede this. There are some pretty bad hymns in the hymnal. Impossible key signatures, multiple changes of time signatures. Like, you need a master's degree in music theory just to make it through the hymn. I will acknowledge there are some pretty terrible hymns in the hymnal. However, there are lots of really, really good hymns. And I think the best part about them, there are two things. One is the poetry of them. Just the poetry. I think that if Holy Comforter, we don't have a children's choir, but say churches that do have rigorous children's choirs, I think that is one of the best ways to raise up young Christians and to teach them the language of our faith is through these hymns. These hymns really do have such a beautiful sense of poetry and theology that I love it. I love it tremendously. The other thing I like about the hymnal is some of the hymns I think are actually very singable. And while they may not be the catchiest of tunes, like tunes you'd hear on the radio, I do think that they're oftentimes predictable, which is good. We have a system of singing through multiple verses that helps you kind of pick up the tune along the way. I think that's actually really helpful in our Christian formation, that we learn some of these tunes and we start to sing them by heart. And again, that poetry really does seep into us. So it's not as repetitive, say, as some contemporary music. It may not pluck at emotional heartstrings as much, though I've oftentimes been moved to tears because of the hymnal. So it may not be like some contemporary music, but I do think that the hymnal in general is really, really good. The other thing about the hymnal, I would say, in our tradition of hymnody in the Episcopal Church, is that it's shared across the Episcopal Church. It reminds us of our Catholicity, Catholic as in universal. Here are three of my favorite spaces. The big picture there, that's Trinity Episcopal Church in Boston off Copley Square. In the upper right-hand corner is the Society of St. John the Evangelist, a monastery in Boston. And then, of course, Holy Comforter on the bottom right. What's beautiful to me is that you have three very different spaces. One is a national treasure, a national icon. I mean, just look at the scale of Trinity Copley Square. One of them was a monastery where men have committed themselves to a life of prayer and worship, and then just a parish church like ours. And we share the same hymnal, and we share the same music. Now, of course, the way the music is shared, the way it's sung, the way it's expressed, this is why the canon there talks about the context. It's all different in all three of these places. But at the end of the day, it is the same music. And I think that helps us have a sense of community as Episcopalians, that we share a lexicon, if you will, of hymns and hymnody. So I think that's one of the reasons why we as Episcopalians stick to these hymns. Now, why stained glass windows? I think that's another valid question. I would say that many contemporary modern churches do not have stained glass windows. They might have other art forms in them to decorate and to beautify them, but we in the Episcopal Church continue to have stained glass windows. Here's a mock-up of the Revelation window that will go in the rear of Holy Comforter, the west-facing rose window. And our artist, Steve Wilson, put it this way, and I thought it was really good. He said that stained glass is the church's art. When you think about it, most stained glass windows are in churches. Now, there are stained glass windows, say, in homes, many old museums and libraries, but when people think stained glass, they think of the church, and it really is our art form. Now, why stained glass windows? And why do they depict things the way that they do? In churches and times when people are not literate or where they were not literate, these stained glass windows are a way of telling the stories of Scripture, of reinforcing them, telling the stories of the saints, so that even if someone could not read the stories from the Bible, they could read a window, if you will, and really get the same sense, the same message of grace that comes through the stories of the Scriptures. So this is Steve Wilson's interpretation of Revelation 21, one of the final scenes in the Holy Scriptures. So I want to point out a few things. I'm going to move my cursor, and I think you'll be able to see. You see the Lamb who is at the center of the throne. And it says that in the city of God, there is no need of lamp because the Lamb is the light of the city of God. You see the Alpha and the Omega. God says that he is Alpha and Omega, beginning and end. You see the river that runs through the city of God. And then you see the 12 fruits for the healing of the nations along the perimeter of the window. I just am really struck by the beauty of this. That here we see, just by looking at the window, the fullness of John's vision in Revelation of what the city of God looks like. And of course, this is one interpretation of it. I'll let y'all look at that for a second more. And I'm very excited that this window will be installed in our church in time for All Saints Sunday. Now, it's interesting that this window depicts Revelation, and that takes us right back to the hymnal. And there are more references in the hymnal to Revelation than any other book of the Bible. And I think that's really important. Revelation gives us all of this poetry, these rich scenes, and this rich imagery. And it really shows then that we as Episcopalians are a people of art and beauty. And we appreciate our stained glass windows and our tradition of hymnody, though they may seem a little old and stuffy, but because they speak to the immense beauty of God. And really, truly, I don't think they're stuffy. I think they're life-giving and formative and holy. So, again, music and art in the Episcopal Church is not for performance, but it's for edification. And so when we hear music and sing music, it's not to make pretty music, but it's to glorify God. When we look at this window, it's not to say, oh, that's so pretty and I love the colors of it. It's an opportunity for us to grow deeper in our faith, to remember that Jesus Christ is the light of the world, that Jesus is the beginning and the end, and that Jesus offers healing for all of the nations. So why do we have stained glass windows? Why do we have such a tradition of music in our church? It is to help us grow closer to God through our worship. So journal question number 11. What is the most beautiful thing you've seen or heard in church? Is it a stained glass window? Was it a piece of music? What was the most beautiful thing you've seen or heard in a church? Thank you for joining me for episode 11 of Liturgy, the Work of the People. If you have any questions, comments, maybe you'd like to share with me your favorite hymn or your favorite stained glass window, I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.